15 minutes. My name is Phil Ebiner from videoschoolonline.com, and in this tutorial I want to teach you the basics of Photoshop, how to get started. It would take many hours to learn all of the cool things you can do with Photoshop, and maybe even many years to perfect those things. But you can get started right now. So in this tutorial, we're going to cover things like getting started, starting a new project, adding layers, adjusting the size of your different layers like photos, adding text, shapes, doing some basic adjustments, and saving so that you can make your own basic graphics or photo edits. So the first thing we need to do is open up Photoshop. So I'm using Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud 2017 version. The new Creative Cloud version sometimes has updates. When they do their own updates, there's maybe new tweaks or tools or things that they improve. But no matter what version you're using, even if you're using a non-Creative Cloud version like CS6 or CS5, you should be able to do most of the things here. I'm also on a Mac, so some of the things that I do here will be a different keyboard shortcut on a PC, but I'll try to explain that while I go. I'm also going to be including the keyboard shortcuts on the bottom of the screen so you can follow along. When you open up Photoshop for the first time, you might get a window like this that pops up for creating a new document, or it might show projects that you've already opened up in the past. If you don't see this window, you can just go up to the File, New button, or Command N on a Mac, or Control N on a PC. This gives you lots of different options for starting your project, starting your sort of graphic. And you can choose the basic size. There are some basics presets that they have, some templates under these different tabs. Or if you've created different templates in the past, or you used different sizes in the past, they'll show up here under the recent. On the right, you can customize it though. So say we want to create a perfectly square image, then we would set the width and the height to, well, whatever we want, but we'll just do 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. Pixels is the dimensions that we use mostly in terms of digital graphics. You can change this to things like inches or centimeters or other types of measurement. Below you have resolution. 150 is a pretty solid standard for web graphics, even for printing. This is basically the quality of the resolution. So I would just leave that at 150. Color mode, we're going to leave at RGB color. 8-bit is fine. Sometimes in different scenarios, you're going to be asked to create a graphic in different settings, and this is where you set them. And then you can change the title up here. So I'm just going to call this test, and then choose create. Once you do that, you have this blank canvas pop up on your screen. And you see here that we have this tab at the top of Photoshop that says test. This is our project that we're working on. Let's just do a really quick run around for where things are in Photoshop. You have your top menu up here. This is where you can get to a lot of different settings and even some filters and adjustment layers and things like that. On the left, we have our different tool panel with all of our different tools. We're going to be going over how to use some of these in just a minute. Over on the right hand side, we have more panels, and you have different buttons and tabs, and these are things that we're going to be able to click and pop open and close them down by shutting them down. We're going to be going over how to use some of these in this tutorial, and by learning how to use some of them, you can basically understand how all of them work. You can rearrange your workspace. You can drag the edge of these things in and out, these different panels and windows. You can drag these buttons up and down to rearrange them. All stuff that you can do to customize your workspace as you learn which tools and panels you use most. So first things first, we're going to practice Photoshop by adding a photo to this graphic. Say we're creating something for Instagram or Facebook. We want to add a photo to this graphic. I'm going to go over to my Finder or my Documents, and if you want, you can download these files in this little tutorial. I've attached them, and I'm going to just place this flowers graphic. I have two photos that we're using. One is this trail photo, one is this flowers one. You'll see that the flowers is a JPEG file. This is a compressed photo file. The trail is a raw image file, and I want to show you how that opens up in Photoshop in just a minute, because it's different when you open up a raw image. With flowers or with any graphic that you have, it doesn't have to necessarily just be photos. We can literally just drag and drop it onto our Photoshop project. You see that it appears. Initially, you can adjust the size of this. You see that it has these adjustments on the edge, this bounding box, and we can resize it by clicking the corners, dragging in and out. You can see that as I do that, it can get squished or stretched. But if I hold shift down, it locks the aspect ratio so that it doesn't get squished or squashed. And that's smart when you are resizing photos. So I can move this around and say I'm happy with where it is, I press return on my keyboard and that places it. If you didn't see those transformation controls, you might need to check this box up here. And that will show or turn on or turn off those transformation controls. You'll also notice that when we added this photo, there's this new flowers layer in our layer panel, okay? So this is our layer panel. You can think of these as all the different layers we're going to add to this project, text, shapes, you can add more images, that kind of stuff. That ends up in the layer panel. The flowers are above the white background, and you can turn on or off any of these layers by clicking this eyeball over here. Quickly, let's just zoom out a little bit from our project or our workspace. You can do that by typing in a percentage down here in the bottom left. Right now I'm at 100%. That's based off of my screen resolution. Depending on your screen, it might be higher or lower percentage. But say I put 80, you can see that it zooms out. We also have a tool that allows us to do that. Over on the toolbar, you can choose this magnifying glass. And if I choose that, I have this plus magnifying glass that allows me to zoom in. Or I can click the minus option up here, because once you select a tool, all those tool options will show up here in the top bar of Photoshop. So we have for this tool a plus or minus. We can also, with most tools, press the option button to change the version of the tool. So if I press the option button, that's on a Mac, for a PC that would be the alt button, you can see that the tool changes from what I had just selected, minus, to plus. So if I go too far, for example, instead of going up here to press plus, I can press the option key and then click. That's just a quick sort of efficiency tip for editing your photos and using Photoshop. Once I do that, I'm still in the plus or minus zoom tool. I want to go back to this move tool, which is the basic tool that you're going to be using to kind of move things around. And I want to make this the full size of this composition. So I'm just going to stretch it out, holding shift and moving it around. You'll notice that on my Photoshop, you see these purple lines pop up like that. And those are just guides that kind of help me understand if this photo is centered or not. If you have this plus or this cross of the pink lines, it means that it's directly centered. If you don't see those pink lines popping up to help guide you, go to your view menu. Beneath extras, you see this show option, and make sure that smart guides is checked on. And you can do that just by checking that on, and also making sure that extras is checked on as well. So that's how you move things, that's how you reposition things. And once you're done, whenever you're done sort of moving or rotating, because you can also rotate photos by hovering over the edge, and you see the mouse turns into this sort of two-sided arrow with a curve, you can rotate things. This is also a good time to understand how Photoshop works in terms of undoing things. Because while you can go back in time and history with Photoshop, it's not an easy tool to undo multiple changes. So you saw there that I actually rotated this, and then to undo that, I'm going to press Command Z, and that undoes that rotation. But if I press Command Z again, it actually just reverts back to, it kind of redos and goes back to that rotation that I had set. To actually go back in time to a previous step, we have a history panel. And it's this little one up here, or if you go up to Window, History, and you'll see all of the different steps we've done. I've only done a few. We created a new project, we placed the smart object, which was the photo, we moved it, and then we transformed it. If I go back to new, it goes all the way back to the beginning, and I can go back to this free transform after I've done all my moves and everything, but you'll kind of understand as you go along how undoing different things is sometimes impossible in Photoshop as you go along. So we learned about the zoom tool. So let's quickly go over just some of the other tools. I'm going to let you play around with these. That's the best way to learn. But some of the coolest ones are the selection tool or the quick selection tool. And you can see if I click and hold, some of these tools have different options underneath. So you click and hold and then you see all of the options pop open. So I'm going to select the quick selection tool, and this is a great way to select just a part of an image. You see here that if I click, it's not going to let me because it says that I need a layer selected. And that's because over in my layer panel, I don't have any layer selected. I first need to make sure that I'm selecting the flowers layer, and that's highlighted before I start making a selection. Say I just want to select this flower up here. Let me just zoom in to 100% so we can see. I can just click over it and you can see that it starts to make a selection. So I'm just clicking and dragging, holding the drag button down. And so that has made a selection of this flower. With this tool, there's a cool refine option, select and mask. So if I click that, you can see what is being selected. You can make all kinds of adjustments here. You can feather the edge. You can use a smart radius for having Photoshop kind of detect the edge on its own. And if I click OK, that selection is still made. Now what can we do with that selection? We can copy it, for example. So let me go back to my move tool, and to copy, I'm just going to press Command C on a Mac, that's Control C on a PC, and then Command V, and Control V. You see that there's a new layer in the layer panel of that new copied version. And if I move it, you can see that I've created another bunch of flowers. Pretty cool, right? If I put this underneath the flowers layer, it disappears. So that kind of, again, helps you understand the layer panel a little bit more. To delete this layer, I'm just going to select it and then just press delete on my keyboard, or this little trash can icon down here in the bottom right. It asks me if I want to delete the layer. I'm going to say yes. So that's one tool. Let me just show you a couple other tools. Some of these tools adjust the actual images. Some actually create new layers. So this dodge and burn tool, this actually, with my flowers layer selected, if I click on it, it's going to say that your smart object needs to be rasterized before proceeding. This gets a little bit tricky. Just know that when you rasterize an object, it actually means that when you're making edits to it, those edits are permanent, okay? So I'm going to click OK just to show you. And when I have this dodge and burn tool, my brush size is really big. Up here in the top left, you can change the size of the brush. And this is for many tools, they appear as brushes. And so if I paint over this, it's very subtle, but you can see that it's actually brightening. And that's because my exposure is set at 54. I'm going to undo that. Let me set my exposure to 100. I'm also going to change the range to highlights. And now if I paint on, you can see that it's really affecting a different part of the image, making it a lot brighter. The shape tool and the text tool are two tools that I use a lot. If I hold over the shape tool, you see all the different options. We have ellipse, lines, rounded rectangle. Let's just use the rectangle tool. When I select that, I have my options up here to affect the shape. The fill color is white, so that's going to be a white shape. If I want to change that, I can just select one of these colors or click this little color picker. I can choose a specific color up here. I can click on my image anywhere to find a specific color, then click OK. You have your stroke option, which is set off right now. And if I just drag, now we have this new shape. You see that also when I did that, this shape appears in the layer panel above flowers. We also have this properties panel that pops open, and that has sort of the similar effects as up here with a couple more. If we want to round our corners, we can do that. by changing the corner roundness. You can change the position, the shape, the color, all in here too. To close any of these panels that pop open, you can just click that button to close it, or just click this little arrow button to close it as well. Now I can go back to my move tool, move this around. Say we want to add a title at the top of this, we can do that. So I'm going to just put this up in the center. Now I'm going to take my text tool. With the text tool selected, you have your font choices, you have your font size, similar to really any sort of text editor. If you click the A character panel or the P paragraph panel, actually that's not a P, but it's kind of a backwards P, you get all of your text options. To create text though, I need to just click in my project and then start typing. Flowers. Okay, so when you're happy with that, to move it and to resize it, I can go back to my move tool. I can move it around, I can resize it, again holding shift down to lock its aspect ratio. And there you have it. Once I'm done moving it around, again I have to press return on my keyboard to actually lock it in place. Let's just go over one quick sort of adjustment option. So if I select this flower and I want to make an overall adjustment, maybe I want to make it black and white, there's lots of different ways that we can do that. One way is by adding an adjustment layer. If I click this little button down in the bottom right, that brings up all kinds of different adjustment layers. And so if I click one of these, let's say hue and saturation, what happens is this little adjustment layer pops up above the flowers layer that I had selected. And then this property panel pops open and I can adjust the properties. So if I want to drop the saturation, make it black and white, I can do that. If I want to boost the saturation, I can do that as well. So that affects everything beneath it. So if I put this above the rectangle, it's going to also affect the rectangle. Got it? And this is a smart way of adjusting your photos because there's other ways to adjust this photo. If instead of adding this hue saturation layer adjustment, which I turned off just by checking the eyeball over there, if I selected this layer, went up to image and then adjustments, and then added a hue saturation adjustment, then say we dropped it to black and white and clicked OK, well now that is locked and we can't do anything to that photo. We can't really undo it. Well, I can undo it right now because I have one step backwards, going back to that it being a colored version, but let me just show you really quickly. What if I then selected both of these, this text and the background shape layer, by selecting the rectangle in the layer panel, then pressing shift and selecting flowers text, so I can select two objects, and moving it down, pressing return to place it. Now if I want to undo, I can undo, but I say, oh, but I want to undo the flowers adjustment, the black and white adjustment. I can't do it unless I go up to the history panel and go back to this layer order right before the hue saturation. But then everything else I did after the hue saturation layer adjustment or image adjustment it has to be did too. So I know it gets a little confusing, but when you're making adjustments to images, it's better to use the layer adjustments and not just image adjustments. One other quick thing I want to talk about is your opacity and blend modes. So the opacity for every layer is basically if it's visible or invisible. You can click and drag, select a layer and then click and drag opacity left or right to really drop or increase it. Or you can select a specific number and actually type it in. So say we want this text to be 50% opacity or opaque. Along with opacity, there is what's called a blend mode. Right now, every layer is set to a normal blend mode. If we drop down this options right here, we can change it to a different type of blend mode. And each of these has a different type of effect. To scroll through these really quickly, actually what you can do is press shift and then the plus or minus keys at the top of your keyboard. They should be right to the left of the delete key. And you can see all kinds of different effects. And these are just cool to know about in case you want to come up with a cool style. You know, this stuff is just something you'll play around with, but I end up using a lot of blend modes when creating graphics myself. So we've learned how to open a project, we've learned how to place objects into that project, resize them. We've learned about the tool panel, not all of the tools, but you know how to use them. Play around with them, just click on them and start using them. If you have questions, you can always let me know. We know that up here with each of these tools, we get different property settings. We have the panels over here that also give us settings for the different tools or layers that we're using. We've learned a little bit more about the layer panel and how that works with adjustment layers. What next? A couple more things that I want you to understand before letting you go play on your own. What if I have a photo and I just want to make an edit to that photo without creating a different size? If I want the project to be the exact size of that photo. What you can do simply is actually just drop the photo into or onto the Photoshop icon. So if I do that into my application icon, what happens is it opens up at the original size. Now I can go in and you see that it's actually made as the background. So that's something to know, and it's locked. So to unlock it, you just have to click that little lock icon to the right side of the layer panel. And now we can move it around. But that's how you open up just a basic photo in Photoshop. I talked about this being a JPEG compressed photo. Here is a raw photo. If I open this up in Photoshop, again, just by dropping it onto the Photoshop application icon, what happens is Camera Raw pops open. Now, not everyone will have Camera Raw, but if you have Adobe Creative Cloud and you have Camera Raw, the application installed, all raw photos should open up like this. And this is where you have all kinds of additional options for making adjustments to this photo. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you have different tabs over here that allow you to do things like split toning, grayscale, adding vignettes, sharpening, changing the exposure with the tone curve. Over here in the basic panel, I can do all kinds of things like increasing the overall exposure, increasing the exposure of just the highlights, increasing the exposure of just the shadows, that kind of stuff, vibrance, clarity, all sorts of tools. I have a full Photoshop class if you're interested that we go step by step over this kind of stuff in detail, but I just want you to understand that if you're opening a raw photo, this is what happens. And then how do you bring it actually into Photoshop? Just click open image up here or down here, and that will actually open it up in Photoshop as a regular project. You see now that I've opened up a few projects that I have them all open in Photoshop like this. So these tabs show all the projects you're working on. Say we're done with a project and we want to save it. The easiest way to do it is, well, first you should save a Photoshop version of your project so you can go back to this Photoshop version and make changes. So just click File and then Save. That's going to open up this project. I'm just going to call it Flower Project. And you see that the extension is PSD. In this save menu, you can change it. You can quickly save a JPEG if you want. You will have different options depending on what options your computer has. But right now I'm just going to save it as a Photoshop project. So now if I close this down, and then I go back to my Finder later on tomorrow and I want to change this, I can just double click the Photoshop project and it will open up this project and I can go ahead and make changes. Say I want to save it for online viewing. If I want to post this online in a different file format, I would recommend going to File and exporting it. Then go from Export to Export As. This opens up the Export As menu and you have all your different options. Typically, you're going to want to save it as a JPEG if you're saving for online. You can save it as a PNG if you want. It's a little bit higher quality. You see your GIF or your GIF, your SVG files. I'm setting it at JPEG. The quality I'm going to leave at 100%. But here you also have an option for changing the image size. Say you're saving it for a website and they want the size to be 500 by 500 pixels. Well, right here in the image size of this export panel, I can set that to 500 pixels. And it's automatically going to change the width and the height to match. This way, I don't have to actually create a brand new Photoshop project at 500 by 500 pixels, redo all of this. I can just sort of scale down this project here in the export settings. You don't want to increase the image size because that's going to decrease the actual quality of the photo, because you're expanding it, you're blowing it up. but if you shrink it, totally fine. So once you're happy with your settings, just click export. It's going to ask you where you want to save it. I'll save it as flower project. It's going to be a JPEG, export. Go back to our Finder, and now we have our flower project at 500 by 500 pixels, perfect for posting online. Wow, I think I've gone over 15 minutes. I tried to get as much as possible into this little tutorial. If you have any specific questions about what I taught in this tutorial, please let me know. I'll try to answer your questions. But know that I have a full Adobe Photoshop CC course that if you're interested in, it's very great. I think it's a great class anyways. A lot of people think it's a great class. It's very project based. So we're going to go over a ton more of these tools, walk through things a little bit more slowly, learn all kinds of cool things you can do with the layer panel, more image manipulation, photo retouching, all kinds of stuff. And you can always find that at videoschoolonline.com. All right, cool. Well, I hope this was very helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I helped you out. Have a great day and enjoy using Photoshop.